Good morning. We are joined today by Miss Star Coulbrooke, the current poet laureate of the city of Logan. She's been the poet laureate since 2014, tenure that she will hold until 2019. She's the current director of the USU Writing Center, and she's in charge of 5 writing centers here on campus. Star, how are you this morning?
I'm fine this morning. It's a great day to have Halloween. It's cold and crisp, and there are a lot of monsters about.
Especially on campus. All right, Star. Well, I think we'd all be interested to know a little bit more about your progression as a writer, where you started, and how you got to this point where you are now, and a little bit more about where you are now. So, Star, I'm going to start off by asking, what was your biggest obstacle in your journey so far as a writer?
Well, now, maybe my biggest obstacle would have been that I didn't come from a lot um, of literary background. So we had some books in the house, but they were mostly church books, and we had a few poetry books: Robert Frost, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Longfellow, um, some of those older poets, but not very many. And I liked reading poems, so that sort of set me off as a poetry writer, I guess. And but the obstacle was that my family was quite quiet. We were farm people. Our stories were short. If we were being punished as children, we usually just got a look from our mother or our dad that said, so yeah, not a lot of vocabulary all the time, like you might find in people who come from more, you might say, intellectual families or more literary families. As I grew up, I went to school in a little 2-room school, and then I went to school in an Idaho elementary school, and then I went on to high school, and the day I turned 16, I walked out of high school. And then I lived life, got married, had children, worked at a lot of jobs. And so the only poems that I wrote in my 23 and a half years of marriage, I think there were maybe 12. So the biggest obstacle, I think, what I'm getting at is that I didn't really have the kind of background that I feel I should have had if I were to be. You're asking about my writing process, and really what I have to say is that before I walked out of high school, I wrote a lot of poems for my friends to give to their boyfriends and girlfriends. And so all of those poems are gone, but they were fun to write, and they sort of carried on this track that I'd been on. My writing process it's inspired from reading poetry, and it's inspired from life events and emotions. And so when you're a teen and you have those intense emotions, you've got to get them out some way. And the way I got them out was through writing poetry. And of course, my poetry was kind of rhymey, and it was like the old poets that I'd read.
Yeah, like what most people think poetry is. It's just fancy rhymes.
Yes. And so I can tell you about how reading that old poetry when I was a child influenced me, because when I was 13, I went away to Montpelier. I lived in Riverdale, Idaho, and my big sister kidnapped me and took me to Montpelier because she thought that I was a rowdy girl, and I needed some tamping down because my dad had died when I was 11.
Oh, wow.
And my mother couldn't handle me. And so this big sister of mine, when I was 13, she was 33. And she said, "Mother, you just can't handle her, and I'm going to take her away." So she did. And while I was in Montpelier, I went to school in a junior high, and the speech class teacher, had us write a poem, all of the students. It was about 10 minutes before the bell rang. And I wrote this poem, and it just came out. It was about my dad, and it was in rhyming quatrains. My dad just loved to be outdoors. I'd never shut him in with all those, and it would go on like that. And then in the end, it said my he never wanted to be shut in or something. He's safe in a big outside right now. The angels are with him. And I took it up and dropped it on her desk and went and sat down. She called me up to her desk and she said, "Where'd you get this poem?" And I said, "Well, I wrote it." And she said, "Well, who wrote it first?" And I said, "Well, I did." And when I finally convinced her that I wrote the poem, she kept the class after the bell rang and read them that poem to show what a poem is really should be like. And so how in the world could I not be a writer after something like that happened to me? That was the thing that set me on my trajectory as a poet. I write nonfiction too, and I love letter writing, but as a poet, that's really what set me on that path. It saved my life. You know, most poets will tell you that poetry saves your life, and if you can't put your emotions out there in some way that redeems you, that revises you, that makes you, that creates art out of all the angst and all the thoughts that just take over your life when you're a teenager. I mean, I don't know how other people do it if they don't write.
Well, and that actually brings up something I wanted to ask you about. Because you're right, you have, obviously poetry comes from the heart, comes from emotions, but, and like for you personally, were there ever moments to where like you knew what emotions you wanted to draw from? You knew you had it all up here, but you were experiencing like what people call like writer's block, where you're just like, okay, I know what I want to say, I just don't know how to say it. Have you ever experienced? Is that something that was common for you? Is still common for you?
No, because I never know what I want to say. So a poem for me comes from an experience or a story I hear or something that I've read, and it sparks something in me that I have to say. It's not that I want to say it, it's that I have to say it, and I'm compelled all the time to write poetry, but I never think of it as something that I want to say. I always just think, I've got this, I've got something, it needs to be articulated, and it's in there, and I just have to wait for it and until it finds its way out.
One final thing I want to ask you, and this is, and I apologize, this is a bit of a cliche question, but seriously though, taking your personal experiences into consideration, I mean, what sort of advice would you give to up and coming writers? I mean, obviously, not everyone can drop out of high school at 16. Not everyone can go. Not everyone can go to California with Hell's Riders
No.
or Hell's Angels. Sorry, but and and obviously people, different writers have different talents, different things. But what sort of advice would you give to those up and coming writers? People who, especially people who, like, they have a feeling maybe they want to be writers, but they aren't. But maybe they're not sure that this is what they want to do. What would you tell them?
Being a writer and not being sure or wondering if that's what you want to be, those aren't really the questions. And so being a writer is not about money or fame or even the things that we always hear when we ask writers, what do you recommend for young aspiring writers, which is go to school and learn and read and read and read and keep writing and keep practicing and just do it. I don't know, there's so much more to it than just all of that. There's this idea of being able to articulate something in such a way that it gives the world an outlook. It gives people an outlook on the world that they might not otherwise have. And so I'm saying that as if we should write for others, but that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to write for ourselves, and we have to really love the idea of being who we are as a writer and not of being a writer. First, we have to be us, and we have to really care enough about what we're saying and giving to give it the kind of attention that it really needs in order for us to thrive as a writer. The writers that I've spoken to who've been highly successful as writers, they've worked so hard, most of them their entire life, and they've put more into writing than just writing. They've put it into marketing themselves, and they've put it into making themselves visible and teaching and doing all the things that writers are supposed to do. And so I think this is my roundabout way of saying it's not about what you think you're supposed to do to be a writer. It's just about being you and letting the writing come and show who you are.
All right. And with that, we're going to end this interview. Thank you so much for your time, Star.
Thank you.